Hello and welcome, FreightWaves fans, friends, ladies and gentlemen. We are bringing it to you live today here on Tuesday. What is happening right now? We've got some interesting things not only happening in the weather, but also how do skateboards connect to freight? Tune in and find out about that. And also we want to demonstrate to you the sensitivity of the sonar data and how is it working with or against the general trends of the stories that we're hearing out there. So, Nick, hello.
Hello, Chad.
What is happening? Doing good, thank you.
Well, still snowing out in the west, the Sierra. Now, yes, that happens in the wintertime, but they've had a lot of snow. A lot of the ski resort owners have been reporting record snowfall this season, and compared to last season, it has been a lot more active. Bad for carriers and for drivers, though. A lot of closures have been happening along I-80 and some of the other routes from Nevada into Eastern California into the Sierra, which are popular routes for drivers. So on our new road condition features, you'll see
I love this feature.
I love it too, because you'll see as we go through time, this is a forecast product here, these areas that are turning purple every so often, right here and right here, that indicates where there might be possible road closures up in Northern California too, in the high elevations where there's snowfall. And there have been reports from California Department of Transportation, known as Caltrans. They have had occasional closings on I-80 and some of the other routes going through the Sierra since this storm started about 24 hours ago. It started early on Monday. Really started to pick up on Monday afternoon. And it's going to keep snowing probably through Wednesday night. So I-80 from Nevada and the Reno-Carson City area, it's going to be raining there, but heading into California along I-80 through Truckee and through over Carson Pass, Echo Summit, Donner Pass, areas like that. Heavy, heavy snow, strong winds with blowing snow, very limited visibility. Very, very bad for drivers. Carriers hopefully not sending their drivers through this area. At least until the snow stops falling. The roads are still going to be slick after that. But that's a real, real big trouble area. And then just to the west of the Sierra, where it's raining, this is in the lower peaks, the foothills of the Sierra, over into the Central Valley, which is along I-5 from Redding all the way down through Sacramento, and even in the San Francisco area, there's a threat for heavy rain and flooding in those areas, as well as strong winds, so possibly power outages along with flooding, maybe mudslides blocking some roads, debris flows from the burn scar areas from some of the wildfires. So a lot going on in California, not good.
But at least it's not falling into the sea.
It's not falling into the sea yet, and they need to be aware of it. And just a few other problem areas that I want to mention too for today and tonight.
Yes, please.
From right here, up here around West Yellowstone and the National Park, which is up here along the Wyoming and Montana border, and across southern Montana, right here, Billings, Bozeman, right along I-90 and I-94, and over into parts of the Midwest as well. There's going to be heavy snow today.
Wow.
And also for tonight, strong winds here and there, so there'll be some blowing and drifting snow, limiting visibility at times in those areas too. So those are the trouble spots today, so just drivers be really careful out there. Try and avoid those areas if at all possible.
Is it all quiet on the eastern front?
All quiet on the eastern front, yeah, for the most part. It's definitely quieting down across the northeast for today, and even across the south. There's still some areas of flooding across the south. Mainly river flooding, not really a lot of major road flooding that I've heard of, especially on interstates. But there are some problems still with flooding across parts of the Tennessee River Valley and other areas of the south. But we're getting a chance to dry out here for another day or two before some showers come back across the south. I know, but the rain that's coming back this week won't be anything like what we had for those 9 or 10 days in a row that caused all the flooding.
Thank goodness. Because that could wash us just clean away.
Absolutely. I hope not, but yeah, you have to be careful out there, that's for sure.
All right. Thank you, Nick Austin, as always. And so we have now got Chief Insights Officer Dean Croke, who is going to give us, well, a whole lot of different kind of points of data, which especially early on in the week, I really like. I like overviews. I like, tell us kind of where we're headed. We did that a little bit on Monday, and now we're doing it on Tuesday. So welcome aboard, Dean.
Hey, Chad.
Great to have you.
Yeah. Chad, today I want to talk a little bit about something what we drivers in the industry colloquially call skateboards.
Yes.
And if you have a look here, this looks very much like a skateboard. And of course, in the industry, we know it as a flatbed. And,
yes.
and these are really interesting, versatile bits of equipment. I want to talk a little bit about flatbed and demand and capacity and new flatbed orders. And what we saw last year with some of the hurricanes with Michael and Florence and how sonar data sets tie together. So a little bit of background on a flatbed first. You'll notice a couple of things with the flatbed. We have a headache rack here behind the cab, does a couple of things. It's attached to the back of the cab. It's called a headache rack because you'll get a headache if the load comes through the cab. But it's also a storage unit for all of your chains, straps, timbers, because if you notice here, it's a pretty flat trailer. It's a very versatile trailer, which means you can put almost anything on it. But you've got to carry all of your own timbers. See the timbers there, the 4x4s?
Yeah.
You can lay your 4x4s across the trailer and put steel on top.
Okay.
So, and you'll notice you've got a couple of tracks down the centre for forklifts to drive on and timber either side. These are about, they weigh about 5 tonne. You can put 25, 30 tonne on them gross, so they're pretty lightweight. You'll notice there's a spread axle.
Yes.
When the axles are more than 8 feet apart, you can put 20,000 pounds on each. If these were closed up and were a tandem with less than 8 feet between them, you can only gross 34,000, 34,000, 12,000, which equals 80,000 pounds. So when you go over the scales, you can only be 34, 34, 12. 80,000 on the 3 plates when you cross over the scales. The reason you have the spread axle, if it's more than 8 feet, you can go 20,000 pounds over each, which means back here, if I've got these spread apart, I can put 40,000 pounds here instead of 34.
Oh.
But I've got to have less up here because my gross has still got to equal 80.
Total.
But why this is really important for flatbed and reefers with spread axles, it means you can load heavier freight down the back. So if you've got a flatbed and you've got a heavy piece of machinery that you can't get up over the drive axles, you can put it over the spread here and not be over your gross of 80,000 pounds. So the spread axles allow you to distribute the weight more. There's pros and cons. They drag more. When you turn corners, this front axle drags. They're smoother. They ride better because you've got them spread apart and they float over bumps. So there's lots of pros and cons to flatbeds, but there's a whole other world around skateboards, and I wanted to just dive into it. There were about 40,000 new flatbeds ordered last year, so record levels of flatbeds ordered, new ones in the market. They represent about 11% of all new trailers ordered, and they represent about 12% of all freight carried.
Okay. So not as much as you might necessarily think.
No, but if you want to get into the industry and haul the most different variety of freight and have the least level of deadhead miles, a flatbed allows you to do that because you can carry almost anything. And you'll see some flatbeds that are drop decks. They have lower profile tyres, but they'll drop down to carry overdimensional machinery. So you might want to. So a lot of military machinery gets moved around the country. If you put it on a flatbed, you'd be over height. But if you put it on a flatbed drop deck, you can drive it up towards the gooseneck and be still under height.
Okay.
Really versatile bits of equipment.
Are there other advantages or disadvantages? Would their detention times generally be
great
longer
question.
Or shorter?
Great question. The problem with flatbeds, and I spent a good deal of years hauling flatbeds, they are a very labour-intensive bit of equipment. This is not like driving a forklift of 24 pallets of produce in. You have to strap it down, tie it down, double tarp it. You have to do all sorts of load protection, load securement. So it takes an enormous amount of time to load and unload flatbeds. And because the machinery and timber and materials you're hauling, sometimes you have to get it lifted off by a crane.
Yeah.
And whenever that happens, whenever you go into a glass plant to get glass taken off, or you go to a construction site to have a big overhead crane take off steel, you could be there for hours. Now, so with ELDs, it becomes a bit of an issue because a lot of your time on flatbeds is spent loading and unloading. It's a real issue.
So whereas you don't have the deadhead miles as much, boy,
right.
you might have some loading and unloading.
It's kind of swings and roundabouts.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
So,
interesting. So a ton were ordered, reducing or expanding capacity.
Yeah.
So increasing the surplus.
Right. So let's dive into the freight side of 2018. Okay. 2018 was a really robust year. Yeah. We had a strong first half of the year. A lot of volume. Freight rates were pretty high. In fact, spot rates for flatbeds were higher than contract rates or paper rates for the first half of the year. Now they're about 21 cents per mile lower than paper rates. So there's been an increase in capacity because of all the new orders. And I want to show you some of that now, because right now with some of the data that's coming out around single family and multi-family home starts, we're seeing an increase in capacity for flatbeds and rates falling again. So let's dive into some of the numbers. If we have a look at, if you could just advance that, here we go. So if we have a look at ACT Research new trailer orders starting back here in 2012, what you can see is that in Q4 every year there's a spike in flatbed orders. There's a 59% jump here up to about 5,000 in that month. There's a 24% jump here. 2016 there wasn't much because it was a pretty bad freight year. Right. There was about a 59% jump here in September, and there's about a 60% jump here in last September, October period.
Wow.
So some of that is seasonality. A lot of people ordering new equipment before the end of the financial year. But part of this increase over here was also driven by, we think, some of the demand that people were seeing for flatbeds earlier on in the year. And if we have a look here, what you can see is that this is 2018, and in August we had a 60% increase in new trailer orders for flatbeds.
The market was finally reacting to the capacity
Great
crunch.
year, let's buy more flatbeds, there's lots of demand, rates are great, right?
But only then did things begin to soften.
But this is why the industry is sometimes looking at a different part of the world. We look at it from a data perspective, and sometimes carriers operate in a bubble. And by that I mean sometimes they're actually not seeing what's going on around them because they're too busy being busy.
Right.
And unless you're benchmarking with your peers, you actually don't know how well you're doing, because your internal KPIs can tell you how well you're doing as a company, but relative to your peers, you may have no idea what's going on outside other than calling a friend and just sort of anecdotal evidence. Yeah. So what I want to do is now overlay this and give you some context around what this meant. So if you look at our flatbed tender reject index, which is the orange line, which is the percentage of loads rejected in the market, as this comes down, capacity is increasing because carriers are rejecting fewer loads. They view the market as having less choice, less flexibility. Spot rates are sort of decreasing. So as this goes down, you can see from about April onwards, the flatbed tender reject index was going down.
Yeah.
But here's this jump in new flatbed orders, about a 60% jump here. But what happened here in mid-September, it actually plummeted. The number of flatbed rejections in the market dropped from about 15% right down to 7%. And that happened in a 2-week period.
Wow.
Now that coincided with a number of things. There's a couple of bad hurricane events, and I want to bring Nick back in just to talk about the severity of those events, because it's affected the housing market up until this day.
Okay, yeah. So what were those events, Nick, and and what was the impact on these regions?
Well, there were two bad hurricanes. One of them was a major hurricane with regard to winds. The official winds on the Saffir-Simpson scale. But that was the second hurricane. The first storm, which was around mid-October, or mid-September rather, was Hurricane Florence, which hit the North Carolina coast. That storm made landfall as a Category 1, which is the lowest on the wind scale. But the problem is the storm stalled right over this one particular region, dumping feet of rain over about a 3 to 4 day period. Yeah. So there was tons of flooding damage as opposed to wind damage, and it was terrible. It stayed over that same area for days. The second storm, which was a little less than a month later, on October 10th, made landfall in the Florida Panhandle. That was Hurricane Michael. That made landfall almost as a Category 5, which is the top category. Sustained winds were 155 miles per hour.
Sounds like a lot.
Okay, which is really fast. 2 more miles per hour, it would have been a Category 5.
Okay.
But this was the first Category 4 storm to hit that part of Florida. Now the difference between that and Hurricane Florence was that Hurricane Michael moved a lot faster, so it didn't dump as much rain into the area, but the wind damage was just absolutely devastating for hundreds of miles along the coast and for inland areas as well, because it took a while for it to, even after it moved inland, to weaken enough. I
remember those hurricanes. We covered it well on FreightWaves here. So thanks for the reminder of that. Well, what was the impact?
So the impact of that is that, there's a rebuilding period that's got to go on. And you can see some of this rebuilding activity here, particularly in the south, because the bulk of multifamily and single family homes are in the south in terms of the home building activity. But what's important to remember here is, and I'll show you a couple of graphs we've got here. If we look at the home purchasing sentiment index, this is a survey that Fannie Mae do. This is Fannie Mae puts out. This is one of our new indexes in Sonar. And you can see as you overlay the capacity, as capacity is increasing, as turn down rejections decrease, capacity is increasing, and it kind of lines up with how homeowners were viewing whether they should buy or sell a home. So this is a survey. They ask about 100 questions of 1,000 people every month. It's the person that has financial responsibility for the household, and they ask a survey, a range of questions that says, how do you feel about home prices, purchase prices, rental prices? Are you likely to sell or buy your house? How do you feel about the economy? How do you feel about the general market conditions? So it's an index that's kind of a barometer about how people feel, and you can see that as capacity was increasing and there was fewer freight options, it was mapping up pretty well to the home purchasing sentiment index. Now, we haven't got our January data out here, but we expect that it'll come up a little bit there. Now, the point of this is, if you were just relying on anecdotal evidence, you would miss the point. But by looking at Sonar data and looking at multiple indices, you can actually get a much better context about what's happening with the market. So this is one index that's a good one to track. The other is single-family housing starts. And this is a really interesting data set, because over here, you can see how that this is a little bit choppy because these are monthly data sets. But these were, there was a drop of about over here when this dropped here, there was, they had 3 months of drops. There was about a 5.3% drop. In July and August, the home purchasing index had dropped about 9%. Commercial building activity had dropped about 13% and had been low for 3 months in a row. So there are a number of indices telling us that the actual housing market was cooling down substantially. And the reason we look at housing starts, in particular single family housing starts, is they're more labour intensive to build. So they take more materials. Single family take more materials, they're more labour intensive to build, and they give the economy more of a boost. Now, a lot of those single family homes were devastated by the hurricanes, Hurricane Florence and Michael, over this period of time here. And you can see that some of the rebuilding activity has started to pick up as carriers have started to reject more loads because they've got more options, and spot rates are a little bit better. Right.
So they dropped off almost completely.
Yeah. Now, if you keep tracking this in Sonar, you'll be able to see the ebbs and flows on these different indices, but it maps very tightly to what we see in terms of carrier and shipper behaviour.
Wow.
And the last chart I want to show you is the DAT Freight Barometer Index, again overlaid on the Flatbed Tender Reject Index. And again, you would be seeing the same thing. You would be saying, okay, demand for flatbeds is falling off. And the interesting thing I see is that the industry was looking at something different. What they were doing was seeing the first half of the year, very robust, lots of demand, rates are really high, let's go and buy more trailers and add more capacity, when we were looking at it saying, the wheels are falling off. And they literally did in late September. But that was the month before record levels of flatbed orders went in. So what happens is, by the time those flatbed orders go through the factory and hit the market, we're going to see what I think will be an oversupply of flatbeds, and we're already seeing that now this month. The December data is showing that single family and multifamily homes have taken another nosedive. So there's more evidence that the flatbed sector is going to have an overcapacity situation, and rates will be very soft as we head into the latter part of Q1.
Right.
I got it right.
That is some awesome analysis, and all with the focus on skateboards or flatbeds. So you learn something new every day, even on, especially on FreightWaves Now. Thank you to Dean and Nick for bringing us these insights. And it's just one of those things, like, don't just trust your gut anymore. It's time, we've got the transparency. It's an era now of data, and being able to analyze and interpret the data to help you make good business decisions each and every day. So yeah, if you had started off the year with thinking, hey man, things are so tight, I don't see how anything's going to loosen up. Boy, if you didn't have the right data in September, you were in for a rude awakening. And some of that fallout we're still experiencing, even though it was a good retail season in Q4. So thanks for tuning in each and every day to FreightWaves Now. We're here for you at 4 o'clock, my favorite time of the day. So check us out on FreightWaves Now and on Twitter, and share the love. And in the meantime, don't worry, be happy.